May I have your leftovers, sir? The words barely rose above a whisper, but in the hush of the restaurant, they landed like a pebble dropped into still water ripples spreading across white tablecloths, polished wine glasses, and hushed conversations. Daniel Thompson, once hailed as the visionary billionaire who had changed an industry, felt his world pause. His hand, still curled around the stem of his wine glass, hung frozen in midair. Slowly, he turned his gaze and saw her. She couldn't have been older than 20. Rain clung stubbornly to her thin, faded coat, darkening the frayed fabric at the seams. Her shoes were soaked, solace nearly splitting. In her arms, she cradled something infinitely more precious than herself, a baby, bundled tightly in a threadbare pink blanket whose color had faded under too many washes and too much hardship. Around them, the soft murmur of the restaurant dimmed to silence. Even the live piano in the corner seemed to hesitate, a lingering chord hanging in the air. Forks hovered, waiters paused, and polished laughter died on expensive lips. Daniel's heart, so long wrapped in layers of grief and habit, felt a tremor. The golden chandeliers above cast their warm light, turning wine into rubies and silverware into liquid mirrors. But to Daniel, everything suddenly seemed dim. All he could see was the young woman standing before him, shoulders drawn, exhaustion etched into her pale face, and the tiny child resting against her chest. "I'm not asking for money," she continued softly, her voice barely more than breath. "Just the food. For him." For a heartbeat, Daniel said nothing. He saw beyond the wet hair clinging to her forehead, beyond the tremor in her arms from cold and fatigue. What he saw was the unwavering resolve in her eyes. Eyes that carried quiet strength, eyes that had known fear and pushed through it, not for herself, but for the tiny life she sheltered. And in that single moment, something inside Daniela, part of him he thought had died alongside his wife and daughter 4 years ago, stirred. Awake. 4 years of returning to the same table, near the window where the lallet always stood fresh. 4 years of ordering the same meal he had shared with his wife, letting it grow cold while memories wrapped around him like chains. Friends had urged him to heal, to let go, but Daniel had clung to routine like a man adrift clings to wreckage. It was all he had left of them, but now, the silent emptiness was interrupted by a mother's desperate courage. A waiter appeared beside him, eyes questioning, voice low. "Sir, shall I?" Daniel raised a hand, a simple gesture that silenced the question. The waiter stepped back, blending into the soft shadows and golden light. The girl didn't flinch under the attention. She didn't step back, didn't plead further. Instead, she held the baby closer, as if the world might break around them. But she would not. The baby let out a small, impatient cry, a soft, raw reminder that hunger couldn't wait for manners or pride. Daniel's vision blurred for an instant. He remembered another small voice, another small face that had once reached for him across a table. The ache that had become a part of his marrow pulsed stronger than it had in years. He blinked, the haze clearing. Slowly, gently, he set down his glass, the clink of crystal sharp in the quiet room. All eyes were on them now, but Daniel no longer noticed or cared. Across the room, a couple shook their heads. Another diner whispered something behind a hand. But their disapproval, their curiosity, meant nothing. In front of him stood a mother, who had walked into a place of linen and chandeliers, past stares and judgment, to ask for what her child needed. Daniel felt a warmth he hadn't known in years, of fragile hope, flickering but alive. And in that moment, everything truly began to change. Someone scoffed, a sharp, dismissive sound that sliced through the quiet. Near the entrance, a man in a tailored coat pulled out his phone, the screen glowing cold blue as he angled it to record. But Daniel didn't care. "Not tonight," he lowered, his gaze to the plate before him. Filet steak, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables. He hadn't touched it, not a single bite. When he looked back up, his voice surprised even himself. "What's his name?" She blinked once as though she hadn't expected the question. "Junior," she replied softly. "He's 8 months." Daniel nodded slowly. In his chest, something shifted, an ache loosening its grip, if only for a breath. Maybe it was the way she stood, tired but unbent. Maybe it was how she spoke, calm, clear, without panic. Or maybe it was the baby little Junior whose wide, curious eyes kept flickering from her face to the plate of food, as if he knew it might mean warmth. Might mean relief. Daniel felt the corners of his mouth twitch, just barely, into something that almost resembled a smile. With a careful hand, he pushed the plate toward her. "Take it," he said. She didn't rush forward, didn't grab, didn't break into tears or collapse with gratitude. Instead, she drew in a quiet breath and reached into a worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder. From it, she took out a small cloth napkin, clean, though its edges were frayed and soft with age. With hands steadier than they had any right to be, she wrapped the food, folding the cloth like someone packing away something precious. Not scraps, not charity. A meal. Then, she slipped a plastic spoon from her coat pocket, knelt right there on the polished marble floor, and turned all her attention to her son. Junior's eyes lit up, tiny fingers fluttering against the blanket. Daniel couldn't move. It felt like breathing itself might shatter the moment. He watched, transfixed, as the young woman blew gently on a spoonful of mashed potatoes and brought it to Junior's mouth. The baby took it, lips parting around the spoon. His small body gave a shiver of relief, as though even this one bite brought warmth back into tiny bones chilled by rain. He let out a soft coo, a sound so innocent and alive it made Daniel's throat tighten painfully. Junior's little hand curled against his mother's chest. Then, unprompted, he offered her a gummy, wide, utterly unguarded smile. Daniel swallowed hard. What he felt wasn't pity. It was all she wasn't begging. She was feeding her child, here on the floor of a place where waiters wore starched shirts and chandeliers cost more than most homes. And she did it with a grace no wealth could buy. All around them, whispers stirred like dry leaves. Disapproval, curiosity, judgment. The soft hiss of silk dresses against chairs, the creak of polished leather shoes shifting uneasily. But Daniel found, to his quiet surprise, that none of it mattered to him anymore. He couldn't look away. She didn't ask for more, didn't explain herself. Her world in that moment had shrunk to the small bundle in her arms, and the next spoonful. Junior cooed softly between bites, his tiny feet kicking beneath the blanket, sending droplets of melted rainwater from her coat sleeve splattering onto the polished floor. Daniel noticed how carefully she held the spoon, how gently she wiped his chin with the edge of the cloth napkin, how every motion carried a mother's steady patience. She never glanced around to see who watched or who sneered. Her eyes were only for him, and Daniel noticed something else. She wasn't ashamed. Her coat patched at the elbows and soaked dark at the shoulders. Her shoes canvas sneakers worn thin and speckled with mud. Her hands red and chapped from cold, but her back stayed straight. Her head stayed high, among men in crisp suits and women in diamonds and silk. Not one of them, Daniel thought, held themselves with even half the quiet dignity she did. When Junior seemed full, she stopped. She didn't scrape the plate for more, or steal an extra bite for herself. Instead, she folded the cloth bundle neatly, carefully, and placed it back into her bag. With slow tenderness, she tightened the blanket around Junior. Brushing his damp forehead with her thumb, she leaned in close, whispered something into his ear that no one else could hear. Then she stood. For the first time, their eyes truly met. And Daniel felt the weight of her gaze, not as an apology or plea, but as something solid and quietly unshakable. "Thank you," she said. It wasn't a casual politeness. It came from somewhere deeper, carrying weight and history, acknowledging. More than the meal itself, she didn't linger, didn't lower her gaze. She turned, stepping carefully around the tables, the baby pressed gently but firmly against her chest. No hurry, no shame. Just steady, quiet resolve. No one stopped her. No one dared. Daniel watched until the glass doors at the entrance closed behind her, and her figure faded into the rain outside. For a long moment he didn't move. The candle flame on his table flickered. The wine glass beside him remained untouched. Across from him, the chair where his wife had once sat felt, if only for tonight, a little less painfully empty. The waiter approached again, voice low, respectful. "Sir, shall I bring another plate?" Daniel shook his head, his voice softer than he'd expected. "No," he said. Quietly, almost to himself, Daniel murmured, "She needed that more than I ever did." And for the first time in years, he meant it. Outside, the air bit cold and sharp, laced with drizzle that danced silver under the yellow glow of streetlights. Rain misted the pavement, turning every crack and pothole into a tiny shimmering mirror. Daniel found himself sitting in his car across the street, engine running, windshield wipers brushing away a thin sheen of rain. He couldn't even recall walking out of the restaurant.
His body had moved before his mind caught up. Why was he still here? He wasn't sure. Curiosity?
Guilt? Or maybe something older, deeper, something he hadn't dared feel in years. A pull that had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with memory. And humanity. Then, through the rain-specked glass, he saw her again, the young woman with the thin coat, holding the child close to her chest. She didn't pause to check the street, didn't look for a bus, didn't call a cab. Instead, she turned down a narrow side street where broken signs flickered and graffiti bloomed across cracked walls. Daniel waited. Breath shallow, then eased. His car forward headlights dimmed, keeping a respectful distance. She walked 2 blocks. The drizzle gathered on her hair and coat, soaking the threadbare fabric darker still. Then she slipped through the rusted iron gate of what looked like an abandoned lot, cracked concrete split with weeds, puddles reflecting broken shards of city neon, and 3 or 4 derelict cars resting like forgotten relics. She moved between them until she reached an old navy blue sedan, its paint faded, body dented, and rear window covered from the inside with a towel pinned clumsily at the corners. It took Daniel a breath to understand. This wasn't just a car. It was home. She opened the back door, ducked inside, and cradled Junior tighter as she settled in. A moment later, a faint glow flickered to life within, a small, solar-powered lantern, casting just enough light to chase away the dark. Daniel turned off his engine and sat silently across the street. Through the fogged-up glass, he watched her sit upright, back propped against a folded coat, Junior curled on her lap. The baby fidgeted, rubbing his tiny fists against his mother's chest. Then, she began to sing. It wasn't loud, just a low, shaky hum. But through the hush of the empty street, Daniel caught the tune, carried softly by memory as much as by sound. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Junior stirred, let out a soft gurgle, then smiled, a smile so pure, gummy, and impossibly wide that Daniel felt something inside him twist painfully. It was the same smile he'd seen back in the restaurant. The mashed potato smile, and in that moment it struck him. This wasn't a woman begging for leftovers. This was a mother building warmth and safety for her child, one bite, one lullaby, one heartbeat at a time. She wasn't asking for the world, just for a moment where her baby could feel full, could feel loved, could feel human. Daniel watched as she laid Junior down on a thin cushion, tucking the blanket around him like a fragile treasure. Her hand rested gently on his chest as she kept humming, even as her own eyes flickered with exhaustion. The baby's eyelids drooped, then fluttered shut, lulled by the quiet rhythm of her voice. Daniel leaned back against his seat, closing his own eyes for a moment, and exhaled a long breath that felt like it had been trapped in his lungs for years. The city's noise receded, replaced by the simple image burned into his mind, a baby's unguarded smile and a mother's quiet grace. That night, sleep did not come easily. Daniel lay awake in his penthouse, wrapped in sheets that cost more than her entire car, staring out of floor-to-ceiling windows at a skyline of glass and steel. The view he once found comforting felt hollow, as though beauty itself had turned cold. Images looped behind his closed eyelids, Junior's small fingers, the way she wrapped leftover food as though it were gold, her damp hair stuck to her forehead, her soft humming in the dark. That car, her home. At 3 a.m., barefoot on polished marble floors, he stood by the window, a glass of water trembling slightly in his hand. The city lights glittered below, reflected back at him in the glass, 1,000 points of cold brilliance. Dazzling but empty, he had everything. A name on buildings, articles in magazines, an empire. But what did it matter when there was no one to share it with? What was the point of power and polish when a mother knelt on a restaurant floor and showed more dignity than any millionaire at those tables? The next morning, restless and heavy-eyed, Daniel found himself back at that cracked lot. He parked a little way down the block, engine off. Watching through his windshield, the Navy sedan sat hunched in the corner, windows fogged from breath and rain. The city around them woke slowly, streetlights fading, shop shutters clattering. Open, commuters hurrying by with coffee cups and gloved hands. Their breath fogged in the cold morning air. Just after 7 a.m., the back door of the car creaked open. She stepped out carefully, Junior cradled close against her chest, wrapped in the same blanket. She stretched, rolling her neck. Exhaustion heavy on her young face, not just the exhaustion of one sleepless night, but of many. She crouched beside the car to change Junior's diaper, moving with practiced speed, hands a little red from the
Cold.
Even so, she smiled down at him, whispered something that made him coo softly, then pressed a kiss to his forehead. She tucked him into a soft carrier strapped to her front, gently adjusting the straps. Then she reached into the front seat of the sedan and pulled out a plastic tub filled with cloths, an old spray bottle and some rags. Daniel's chest ached at the sight, a morning ritual born not of choice, but of survival. She walked a few blocks, until she stopped in front of a small neighborhood cafe. Its windows were streaked with rain and city dust. She set the tub down, pulled out a rag and began to scrub the glass, shoulders rising and falling with slow effort. After a moment, a man in an apron opened the cafe door, stepped out and handed her a muffin and a few coins. She smiled at him with quiet gratitude, took a seat on the curb, and broke the muffin gently in half, one half for her, the other mashed with careful fingers for Junior. Daniel watched from his car, hands tight around the steering wheel, the cold biting through the glass and the warmth of the heater. This was her life, one small kindness at a time. One window at a time, one shared muffin on a gray morning. And for the first time in years, Daniel realized just how much the world could break a person and how astonishing it was to find someone still standing, still singing, still sharing. Crumb by crumb. One kind stranger, one lucky break, and yet she didn't complain. She didn't look defeated. Instead, she looked like someone who had quietly decided that as long as her baby had food, warmth, and a lullaby, she could keep going. Daniel had watched CEOs pitch billion-dollar ideas with less fire in their eyes. He leaned back in his seat, a breath misting on the cold glass, and made a choice. If she wasn't going to ask for help, he'd offer it anyway, but gently, quietly, respectfully, and always for the baby first. He waited through the day. The light turned gold and then dimmed to gray. Evening fell, rain coming in soft threads that glistened under the street lamps. She returned to the lot near sunset, carrying the same plastic tub of cleaning rags and spray. Her coat was damp from mist, shoulders drooping under the silent weight of exhaustion. Junior slept against her chest, his tiny fist curled around a loose thread in her scarf as if even in sleep he couldn't let go of her. Nail parked 2 cars away, his heart pounded in a way he hadn't felt in years. He stepped out slowly, careful not to startle her. As she reached the old Navy sedan and fumbled for the handle, she sensed him before she saw him. Her back straightened, her arm tightening protectively around the baby. "I'm not here to bother you," Daniel said gently, voice low against the hush of the lot. "Or to take anything." She turned then, her gaze sharp and guarded, but not panicked, just cautious. "I just wanted to talk," he added, the words almost tasting strange in his mouth. They hadn't been used this way in so long. For a few heartbeats, the cold air hung silent between them. Then, very slightly, she nodded and leaned against the edge of the car door, shifting Junior's weight in her arms so his head rested comfortably. "You followed me last night," she said quietly. He didn't deny it. "Yes." "Why?" Daniel took a breath. The answer surprised even him. "Because I couldn't forget the way your baby smiled after eating mashed potatoes." She blinked. For a moment, the caution in her eyes gave way to something softer, surprise, perhaps. "What's his name?" he asked again, this time softer. She looked down at the baby asleep against her chest. "Junior." Daniel let a small smile reach.
His lips, strong name.
She looked him over carefully. from his rain-darkened tailored coat to his clean shoes that didn't belong among gravel and weeds. "You're not like us," she said, not bitterly, just truthfully. "I know," he admitted. His voice grew quieter. "But I also know what it's like to lose someone. To sit alone at a table with food you can't eat. To feel like the world kept going without you." Her gaze shifted. For the first time, she seemed to see him not as a stranger in an expensive coat, but as someone who spoke a language she recognized. Loss. "I'm Daniel," he offered. "Ada," she said after a pause. Daniel nodded gently. "You used to be in school, didn't you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Computer science. Before junior." "Where's his father?" Daniel asked carefully, bracing for the answer he feared. Ada looked down, voice steady but low. "We met in school. When I told him I was pregnant, he said he wasn't ready to be a father, told me to get an abortion." She paused, a small breath shivering out of her. "But I couldn't. I decided to keep the pregnancy." Her eyes stayed on the baby, her voice growing firmer. "When my parents found out, they cut me off completely. Since then, it's been just me and him." Daniel felt quiet anger rise in his chest, not at her, but at the smallness of the world that had failed her. "How long have you lived in the car?" he asked, almost afraid to know. "Almost 2 months," she replied, her tone flat as though the words had been worn smooth by repetition. Daniel's gaze swept over the car, peeling paint, taped windows, sagging seats. "That's not safe," he said gently. "I know," Ada whispered. "But it's warm, and it's all I've got." Daniel nodded slowly, his heart heavy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper.
His hand trembled just slightly. "I'm not offering money," he said quickly, seeing
her guard rise again. "Just this." She unfolded it carefully. It was a prepaid reservation at a modest motel, clean, small, safe for 2 weeks. "No strings," Daniel added. "I don't want anything from you. I just want Junior to have a bed and you to have a break." Ada looked at the paper, then at him, then at her baby. For the first time, her shoulders seemed to lower, as though even her exhaustion needed rest. She didn't thank him. She just nodded, her voice a rasp barely above the breeze. "Okay." The motel wasn't much, a faded red sign, 2 floors of rooms, curtains washed so many times they had lost their color. The man behind the front desk barely looked up from his newspaper, but to Ada it felt like a castle. She unlocked the door, stepped into a room that smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and old curtains. But the sheets were clean, the heater rattled to life, and for the first time in weeks there was a bed instead of a car seat. Junior let out a sleepy whimper. Ada laid him gently on the bed, smoothing the blanket around him. She touched his cheek and whispered, "It's okay, baby, we're safe now." That night, Ada slept lying down, not curled in a cold back seat, not half waking every hour to check on Junior, but on an actual bed with 4 walls around them and heat against the night air. Daniel didn't sleep either. Instead, he paced the floor of his penthouse, marble, cool under bare feet, city lights blinking outside the glass like distant stars. He thought of Junior's mashed potato smile, Ada's quiet strength, the hush of a mother's lullaby in the dark. Before dawn, he drove back to the motel. Carefully, so no one would see, he left a small sealed bag at Ada's door, baby formula, diapers, a thermos of hot tea, and a note written in plain handwriting, for Junior. No signature. No expectations. He left quietly before she woke, and he did it again the next day. And the next each morning, something new appeared at her door. Clean onesies, a soft knitted blanket, baby lotion, a small pack of wet wipes, always chosen for Junior. Always left silently, respectfully, and each time he drove away, Daniel felt something in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Not pity, but purpose. Something gentler. Something truer. It wasn't a romance blooming in candlelight, nor a hero sweeping in to save the day. It was something raw, human, and painfully real. 2 people, battered by different storms, finding shelter in each other. For a moment, the hospital air was cold, sharp with antiseptic. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the hum of distant monitors seemed to echo in the hollow spaces of the night. Ada didn't know how long she stayed pressed against Daniel's chest. Her tears left dark circles on his shirt, but he didn't flinch. He just held her, steady as stone, until her breathing slowed and her shoulders stopped shaking. For the first time in so long, she didn't have to be strong. Just for a breath, just for a blink, she let herself be held. And Daniel, the billionaire in a hoodie, hair damp with rain, eyes rimmed with sleepless worry, felt something in his chest unravel. Something long frozen melt. They sat there in silence, not needing to fill it. And slowly the world around them began to settle. When the nurse returned, she spoke gently, her voice softened by the sight of them together. "Junior's sleeping now," she said. "You can see him if you'd like, but only one at a time." Ada stood first, wiping her face on her sleeve, shoulders still trembling but spine straightening with a mother's resolve. She stepped through the double doors, leaving Daniel alone in the too bright waiting room. He watched her go, the empty seat beside him still warm from where she'd sat. For the first time in years, he realized he wasn't thinking about his meetings, his emails, or the company. He was thinking only of them, the young woman with tired eyes, and the baby whose mashed potato smile had cracked his armor, inside the small pediatric room. Ada stood over Junior's crib. His tiny chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths. The fever had loosened its grip. She traced a thumb over his soft cheek, her eyes glistening with fresh tears, this time, not from fear but relief. She whispered to him, words that no one else would hear. "You scared me, little man. But you're so strong, just like your mama." She kissed his forehead, breathing in the warm baby scent she'd nearly lost tonight. Then she stepped back, letting the nurse guide Daniel in. Daniel walked in, his steps almost hesitant. Junior slept, lashes damp and cheeks flushed but calm. Daniel's gaze softened in a way Ada hadn't seen before. Even in the restaurant, he reached out, gently laying a hand on the metal rail of the crib, careful not to wake the baby. For a moment his eyes closed as though he were saying a prayer he didn't know he remembered. When he opened them, Ada saw it, not pity, but something that looked painfully close to love. Not romantic love, but the raw, protective love of a man who had lost and dared to care again. They left the hospital just before dawn, walking side by side under a sky bruised with morning light. Neither spoke at first. The words were fragile, like glass in cold hands. Finally, Ada broke the silence. "Thank you. For coming, for everything." Daniel shook his head. "Don't thank me. Thank him." He nodded at Junior, now dozing peacefully. In her arms, "He's the reason I came. He reminded me what it means to care." Ada swallowed, her voice hoarse from tears and sleeplessness. "Why us?" Daniel's gaze met hers, quiet and steady. "Because you asked for nothing, and gave everything." They reached the motel. The air smelled of wet asphalt and cold earth. Ada unlocked the door. Stepping inside with Junior still bundled to her chest, Daniel lingered in the doorway, the threshold between his world and hers. He didn't want to leave, but he knew he couldn't stay. "Will you be okay?"
He asked. Ada nodded, though the exhaustion hung heavy in her eyes. "We always are, somehow."
Daniel hesitated, then gently set a fresh bag on the small table. Diapers, formula, a warm knitted hat for Junior. "No note this time." His eyes said enough. "Rest," he told her softly. And before she could answer, he stepped back into the breaking dawn, hands in his pockets, heart fuller and heavier than it had been in years. Ada stood there, the baby in her arms, watching him go. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if she could ever repay what he'd done, but for the first time in too long, she didn't feel completely alone. Outside, the city stirred awake. Buses rumbled by, shops opened their metal shutters. The first pale sunlight spilled onto wet pavement, and somewhere between the baby's slow, steady breaths and the echo of Daniel's footsteps fading into morning, something soft and real had begun to grow. Not a rescue, not charity, but something braver, something closer to hope. Gentle, steady, always showing up. Some mornings he'd bring fresh bread still warm from the bakery. Other days it was nothing at all but himself. Tired eyes, soft smile, a cup of coffee balanced in one hand. Ada had never asked for these things, and Daniel never offered them like gifts. They became small rituals. Unspoken promises carved into the quiet rhythm of days that finally felt normal. The apartment itself softened over time. Plants began to appear on the sill, leaves drinking. In the morning sun, Junior's toys gathered in colorful piles across the floor, bright plastic laughter waiting to be stepped on. Ida sometimes apologized for the mess, but Daniel only smiled. It looks like someone lives here. That's a good thing. At night, after Junior fell asleep in his crib, cheeks flushed with dreams, Ada and Daniel would sit on the little balcony. No wine, no candlelight. Just two chipped mugs of tea cooling in their hands, steam curling into the evening air. Sometimes they spoke about nothing, the shape of clouds, the stubbornness of tomato plants, the price of baby formula. Other times they spoke of harder truths. Ada spoke of fear, that she might lose Junior to something she couldn't fight. Daniel spoke of guilt, the endless question of why he survived when his family didn't. They never tried to fix each other, they simply listened, and somehow that was enough. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't even love at second or third. It was something slower, quieter, trust built spoonful by spoonful, morning by morning. A kind of love that doesn't arrive like lightning, but like dawn, so gradual you barely notice until the whole sky is bright. One Sunday, Ada invited Daniel to the park. Junior toddled ahead, chasing pigeons and falling every third step, each time picked up by the same patient hands. Daniel had thought he'd forgotten how to laugh, truly laugh, but watching Junior try to share half a soggy cracker with a passing dog proved him wrong. Ada caught Daniel watching, a smile ghosting at the corners of his mouth, and for a moment their eyes locked. She saw him, the man behind the magazine covers and billions, a man still healing, still human. And Daniel saw her, not a headline, not a scandal, just Ada, brave, stubborn, soft around her child. In that shared glance there was no past. No scandal, no tragedy, only the gentle truth of two people who had chosen, again and again, to show up. Weeks turned into months. Junior learned to walk, then to run, his laughter turning hallways into playgrounds. Ada started online classes. At night, determined to finish the degree she'd left behind. Daniel showed up at the apartment with takeout and a stack of coding books. I thought you might need these. Or not. Just in case. Ada teased him about his bad taste in covers. He teased her back about her chipped mug collection.
And
the teasing, there was something tender, a softness neither had thought they'd find again. One evening, Junior fell asleep early. Ada and Daniel sat on the sofa, knees almost touching, silence wrapping around them like a blanket. Ada took a breath, words dancing on her tongue. Why us, Daniel? She asked softly. Out of everyone in that restaurant, why did you stop for us? He looked at her, voice low. Because you were the first person in a long time who wasn't afraid to ask. And the only one who didn't ask for anything for herself. Ada lowered her gaze, the memory of that night still raw, her voice shaking, her hope so small it barely had breath. I was so scared, she whispered. Daniel reached over, his hand resting over hers. So was I, he said. They didn't call it love. But it felt like something braver. Something that survived the coldest nights and sharpest headlines. Two people broken in different ways, finding peace in the same quiet room. One morning, as the city stirred awake outside, Ada caught Daniel watching Junior sleep. You look at him like you knew him before. She teased gently. Daniel's voice was quiet, rough around the edges. Maybe I wish I had. Ada's chest tightened at that, at the truth in it, at the hope. She rested her head on his shoulder, just for a breath. And for once, Daniel didn't feel like a man haunted by ghosts. He felt like a man standing in the present, in a small sunlit apartment, beside a woman who had once asked only for his leftovers, and ended up giving him everything. Him up, pressing a gentle kiss to Junior's forehead. Ada, tears streaming but smiling brighter than ever, reached out and cupped her son's cheek. In that moment, it wasn't about a perfect ceremony or flawless vows or even the quiet park. Around them, it was about them, three hearts beating as one. The officiant cleared his throat softly, voice warm. By the love you've chosen and the family you've made, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel leaned forward, his forehead resting gently against Ada's for half a heartbeat, then kissed her. Tender and certain, Junior nestled between them, squealed in delight, small hands clapping, eyes bright. Their small circle of friends clapped too, a sound light and sincere, floating up to where the sunlight filtered through the oak leaves. There was no orchestra, no confetti, only birds singing somewhere nearby and the rustling of grass beneath their feet. Later they sat on a picnic blanket under that same tree. Junior curled in Ada's lap, eyelids heavy, thumb in mouth. Daniel stretched an arm behind Ada, fingertips brushing her shoulder, as though to remind himself this was real. They shared leftover cake, still soft and sweet, the frosting messy. On Junior's cheek, no headlines, no cameras. Just laughter, quiet conversation, and the kind of peace that only comes after you've walked through darkness and chosen every day to keep loving. Seasons turned. In the apartment now painted in soft blues and yellows, Junior grew taller, blocks turning into books, babbles into words. Ada, degree finally completed, began designing software for nonprofits, helping women like herself find housing and legal help. Daniel kept running his company, but more mornings were spent in the kitchen making pancakes shaped like stars, burning most of them, laughing every time. One rainy night, after Junior had drifted to sleep, Ada stood by the window looking out at the shimmering city below. Daniel walked up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. Do you ever think about that night? She whispered. Every day, he answered, without hesitation. She turned to face him, eyes soft. Do you regret it? He brushed a loose curl from her face, gaze steady. Not for a single breath. They had been strangers. Then survivors. Then something braver. A family. In the quiet that followed, they stood together, rain tapping against the window, Junior's small snores drifting from his room. No grand speeches, no spotlight. Only love, quiet and real, like a candle glowing steady against the night. And for them, at last, that was everything. He scooped Junior up, one arm holding his son, the other wrapped around his bride. I love you, son, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Ada stepped closer, wrapping herself around them both, her boys. And in that sun-drenched corner of the park, no one cared how the story had begun. Not the pain, not the past. Not the man who had once walked away. What mattered was what had been built from the ashes. A family. Not perfect, not easy, but real, forged through loss. Restored. Through love. Chosen by heart. And in that quiet, sacred moment beneath the branches of an old oak tree, something unbreakable took root. They were together, and that was more than enough. The end. If you love this story, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel for more captivating stories like this one.